I did not know he had applied to Caldwell Group. Our HR process had enough layers that his application had moved through the initial screening before anyone made the connection. When Jana, our HR director, sent me that message, he had already been through a phone screening and had been invited in for an in-person interview. He was qualified, genuinely qualified. His operations background was applicable to the senior account manager role, which required someone who could manage client relationships and project timelines with the kind of systematic precision my father had spent 40 years developing. He had not applied knowing it was my company. I know this because the day my father walked into my office building for a job interview, he did not know it was my office building. He did not know that the name on the door, Caldwell Group, a mid-sized marketing and communications firm with 63 employees and clients across 11 states, belonged to me. He did not know that the receptionist who greeted him had been hired by me, that the coffee in the waiting area had been selected by me, that the quiet carpeted hallways he sat in for 20 minutes with his resume and a manila folder had been built, floor by floor, decision by decision, over 11 years of work that he had told me, specifically and repeatedly, I was not capable of. He sat in my waiting room and he did not know. And I sat in my office 2 floors up with a message on my screen from our HR director that said, "Heads up, one of the candidates for the senior account manager role has the same last name as you. James Caldwell. Any relation?" And I sat very still for a very long time before I typed back, "Yes, give me a few minutes. My name is Evan Caldwell. I am 41 years old. I run a marketing firm in Nashville, Tennessee, that I started when I was 29 with a business partner, a laptop, 2 clients, and the specific and slightly reckless confidence of someone who has been told they cannot do something so many times that the telling has begun to work in reverse. I have a wife named Simone, a son named Marcus, who is 7 and already more certain of himself than I was at 25, and a life that is genuinely, fully, specifically mine. And none of it, not a single floor of that building, came from my father believing in it. Every square foot was built in spite of him. And the morning he walked into my lobby with his resume, I had to decide, in the space of a few quiet minutes, what that meant and what I was going to do about it. Before I tell you how that day ended, I want to welcome you to the Revenge Diaries. If you are new here, this is a channel for real stories, real people, real betrayal, real consequences, told honestly and completely. Please subscribe and hit that like button if stories like this resonate with you, and drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. I check the comments every week, and this community is one of the most thoughtful I have ever been part of. Now let me take you back to the beginning, because to understand that morning in the lobby, you have to understand what came before it. And what came before it was a long time in the making. My father, James Caldwell, is a man I have spent most of my adult life trying to understand without excusing. He is 67 now. He was an operations manager at a manufacturing plant in Clarksville, Tennessee, for most of his working life. A man who understood logistics, efficiency, the specific mechanics of how things get built and moved and delivered. He was good at his job. He was precise and organized and had a way of breaking down complex problems into component parts that made him valuable to employers and occasionally useful as a parent. What he was not good at, and I say this with a specific honesty that comes from years of therapy and distance and a very patient wife, was allowing space for his children to be different from what he had imagined. I am the second of 3 children. My older sister, Patricia, became a nurse, which my father respected because it was concrete and essential and paid a visible salary. My younger brother, Greg, went into trades, HVAC, eventually running his own small service company, which my father respected because it required technical skill and produced tangible results. I went into communications. I studied marketing and journalism at Tennessee State. I liked words. I liked the way a well-constructed message could change how a person felt about something. I liked the intersection of psychology and language that sits at the center of good marketing, and I was genuinely good at it from early on. My father did not understand any of this. Not the field, not the appeal, not the logic of choosing work that lived in the abstract space of persuasion and brand and narrative. He was a man who understood things you could point to. A pipe fitting correctly installed, a shipment arriving on schedule, an operation running without waste. What I was interested in had no analog in his world, and rather than being curious about it, he was dismissive of it. He did not have the language for dismissal most of the time. He was not a man who made speeches. He was a man who made comments, small ones, consistent ones, the kind that arrive so regularly and so casually that they stop sounding like criticism and start sounding like weather. Just the condition of things. He told me I was wasting my education when I declared my major. He told me marketing was something people did when they could not do anything real. He told me at my college graduation that I needed to have a backup plan. When I got my first real job at an agency in Nashville, entry level, nothing glamorous, but real, he asked how long I thought it would last. When I got promoted 18 months later, he nodded and said, "Marketing's a young person's game, Evan. Don't get comfortable." When I was 26 and shared with him that I was seriously thinking about starting something of my own eventually, he looked at me across the kitchen table and said, flat and direct and without any real cruelty, which somehow made it worse, "You don't have what it takes to run a business. You never have." And then he got up and refilled his coffee. And I sat at that table for a few minutes after he left the room, and I decided something. Not consciously, not dramatically, but I decided it. I started Caldwell Group when I was 29 with a partner named Rochelle Tatum, who I had worked with at 2 previous agencies and who had the operational precision that complemented my creative instincts in a way that made us together exactly what neither of us was separately. Rochelle handled contracts, finances, staffing. I handled clients, strategy, creative direction. We started in a rented office that had previously been a chiropractor's waiting room and still had a faint smell of antiseptic that we covered with a diffuser, and eventually with the smell of a working office, coffee and paper, and the specific warmth of people doing good work close together. I did not tell my father about the launch. I told my mother. I told Patricia. I eventually told Greg, who was characteristically direct about it. He said, "If you need help moving furniture, call me. If you need advice on running a business, I'm probably the wrong guy, but I'll listen." I did not tell my father because I understood by 29 that his response would cost me something I needed to keep intact during the specific vulnerability of beginning. Some things are too fragile for certain atmospheres. A seedling does not grow faster when you tell it all the reasons it is unlikely to survive. I kept it out of his reach, and then I grew it. The first 3 years were hard in ways I did not fully anticipate and would not trade for anything. We lost a major client in year 2 that had represented a third of our revenue. We had to let one person go, which remains the most difficult professional conversation I have ever had. Rochelle and I went 3 months without drawing full salaries. I had nights where the math did not work, no matter how many times I ran it, and I sat in the living room of my apartment at 2 in the morning, wondering if my father had been right. That is the specific cruelty of internalized doubt. It arrives exactly when you are most depleted, and his voice, with his specific phrasing. "You don't have what it takes." I heard it at 2 in the morning more than once. I went to sleep and woke up and went back to work. By year 4, we had rebuilt the client base. By year 5, we had hired our 20th employee and moved into real office space, the kind with a conference room and a kitchen and a sign on the door that had our name on it. I stood outside that door on the day we moved in, just for a moment before anyone else arrived, and I thought about the kitchen table in Clarksville. And then I went inside and got to work. I want to tell you about Simone because she is a central part of this story in a way I want to honor properly. I met Simone at a client event when I was 32. She was working in event coordination, precise and warm in equal measure, with the specific combination of organizational intelligence and genuine kindness that I recognized immediately as rare. We dated for 2 years. We got married on a September Saturday at a venue in Nashville with 60 people we both actually cared about. My father came. He wore a good suit. He danced with my mother at the reception. He shook my hand when we said goodbye that night and said, "Nice party, Evan. Not congratulations. Not I'm proud of you. Nice party." And Simone, who had met my father enough times by then to understand the landscape, squeezed my hand on the drive home and said, "He doesn't know how to give you what you need. That's his limitation. It's not yours." I looked at her for a moment and I said, "I know." And I did know. And knowing it did not make it not hurt. My father retired from the manufacturing plant at 64 after the plant restructured and his position was eliminated. He received a severance package and a pension that covered the basics, but not the life he had been accustomed to. He was 64 with decades of operations management experience and a job market that had moved significantly from the world he had built his career in. He spent about a year doing occasional consulting work. That dried up. He updated his resume and began applying. My mother mentioned it once carefully when we spoke on the phone. "Your father is looking for work. It's been harder than he expected." I said, "I'm sorry to hear that." And I meant it. Not sarcastically, genuinely. Because whatever my father had done and said and withheld, he was still my father, and watching a man lose the thing that had defined him is not something I am capable of finding satisfying. Use I know my father. If he had known, he would not have applied. His pride, which had been the primary obstacle between us for most of my adult life, would have prevented it completely. I want to pause here because this is the moment where I need to tell you what I was thinking in those few quiet minutes between Janice's message and my response. Because people ask me this all the time when I tell this story, and I want to answer it honestly. I did not think about revenge. I want to be clear about that. I did not sit in my office thinking about how to use this moment as a weapon. What I thought about was this. There is a man in my lobby who told me I would never run a business. And he is sitting in the lobby of my business in a waiting room I designed, about to interview for a job that I have the authority to give or not give. And whatever I do next, I want to do it in a way that I can live with. That was the thought, not triumph, not strategy, just the question of what I could live with. I went downstairs. I did not send someone to get him or send a message through Jana. I went downstairs myself, which was not the standard protocol, and I walked into the reception area, and my father looked up from his phone and saw me. And the sequence of expressions that crossed his face in the next 3 seconds is something I have thought about many times since. The first was recognition. The second was confusion. The third was the specific, slow-arriving understanding of a man who has just realized where he is and what it means. He stood up. He was holding his manila folder. He said, "Evan, just my name." The same way my mother said, Ryan, in one of the other stories I've heard told. Just the name, and everything else in the silence around it. I said, "Hey, Dad, why don't you come on up?" Not coldly. Not warmly exactly either. Just the way I would say it to anyone I was about to have an honest conversation with. He followed me to the elevator. We rode up 2 floors without speaking. I took him to my office, not a conference room, my office, and I closed the door and I asked him to sit down. And he sat across from my desk, in the chair where my clients sit, with his manila folder in his lap, and he looked at me the way I had never seen him look at anyone. Like a man without the script he had been reading from for 67 years. I said, "I want to talk to you for a few minutes before we do anything official." He nodded. I said, "This is my company." I started it 12 years ago with a partner. We have 63 employees. We work with clients in 11 states. I built this. I did not say it to wound him. I said it because it was true and because I had never said it to him directly, and I needed him to hear it from me in this room before anything else happened. He looked at his hands. He looked at the folder. He looked at me, and he said it in a voice that was quieter than I had ever heard from him. I know, Evan. I've known for a while. I said, then why have you never said anything? And he said, because I didn't know how to be wrong about you and say it out loud at the same time. And I sat with that for a moment, because it was the most honest thing he had ever said to me. And it was so insufficient and so human and so exactly like him that I did not know whether to be angry or sad or both. I told him I was going to recuse myself from the hiring decision, that it would be handled entirely by Jana and the relevant team leads, that I would have no role in it, and that whatever decision they reached would be made on the merits of his qualifications alone. He nodded. He said, that's fair. I said, I need you to know that if you get this job, you will be an employee here, not my father at work, an employee. Those are different things, and they will need to stay different things. He said, I understand. And then he said, Evan, I waited. He said, I was wrong about what you could do. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. I looked at my father, 67 years old, manila folder in his lap, in a chair in a company I built after he told me I could not build it. And I said, I know, Dad, and I meant it. Both parts. I know you were wrong, and I know you're sorry. He got the job. Jenna called me after the interview process was complete and said the team felt he was the strongest candidate and asked if I had any concerns. I said I had none and that she should make the decision she would make if I were not related to the candidate. She hired him. He started on a Monday in March, and he was, by every account I received through normal management channels, exactly as good at the job as his qualifications suggested he would be. He was precise, organized, reliable, and had a way of managing client timelines that the team found valuable. He did not trade on our relationship. He did not mention it to colleagues. He showed up and did the work, which is what I had been doing for 12 years, and which I think was the only apology language he actually knew. We had lunch together about 3 months after he started, not at the office, at a restaurant nearby, just the two of us. He ordered the same thing he always orders, a club sandwich, no tomato, coffee black. He asked about Marcus. He asked about Simone. He asked about the company in a way that was different from anything he had ever asked before, genuinely curious. Specific questions, the questions of someone who is trying to understand rather than evaluate, and I answered them. And at some point during that lunch, I understood that this ordinary lunch with a club sandwich and black coffee was what I had wanted from him for most of my life. Not a grand reckoning. Not a formal apology in a room full of witnesses. Just him asking questions he actually wanted the answers to, and listening when I spoke. Let me ask you something, because I have been holding this question for a while, and I genuinely want your perspective. If it had been you in that office, if the person who had told you all your life that you were not enough had walked into your building for a job, what would you have done? Would you have recused yourself the way I did? Would you have conducted the interview yourself? Would you have turned him away entirely? There's no right answer, and I'm not saying my choice was the only valid one. Drop it in the comments. I want to know what this community thinks, because the responses I have gotten when I have asked this in person are some of the most interesting conversations I have ever had. My father works at Caldwell Group to this day. He is one of our senior account managers. He has never once, in 3.5 years, tried to leverage our relationship for professional benefit. He has never asked for special treatment. He has never brought family business into the office. He reviews his performance feedback with Jana the same way any other employee does, and he is, by every professional metric, someone I would hire again. Something shifted between us when he came to work there. Not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily. The Sunday calls became easier. The visits to Nashville when he and my mother drive up became warmer. Marcus calls him Grandpa Jim and sits next to him at dinner and asks him to explain how things work. And my father answers in the patient and specific way of a man who has finally found someone who wants to hear exactly what he has to offer. I want to be careful here because I do not want to tell this story as if everything is repaired and perfect and complete. There are still moments, rare ones, but real, where something echoes from the years before, a comment that lands wrong, a silence that carries old weight. Simone and I have talked about this honestly, and she says what she has always said. He is who he is, and who he is has changed. Those two things are both true. She is right. They are both true. And I am learning, slowly and imperfectly, to hold both of them without letting either one cancel the other out. Here's what I want to leave you with. I did not build Caldwell Group to prove my father wrong. I want to be honest about that because I think people expect the story to end with that framing, and it does not. I built it because I loved the work, because Rochelle and I had something real and we both knew it, because the specific combination of language and strategy and human psychology that sits at the heart of great marketing is genuinely, endlessly interesting to me. I would have built it even if my father had believed in me from the beginning. The doubt was not the fuel. The passion was the fuel. The doubt was just the weather I built through. But I will tell you this. When Marcus is older, when he comes to me with something he wants to build or become or try, I am going to ask him questions. Real ones. I am going to try to understand what he is reaching for, even when it does not map onto anything I recognize. I am going to be someone who makes space for a version of success that does not look like mine, because the most enduring consequence of what I live through is not the building or the clients, or the 63 employees, or the carpet in the lobby. It is the very specific and very conscious decision to be a different kind of father than the one I had. Not a better one in every way. James Caldwell was, in many respects, a good man and a hard worker and someone who showed up. But a different one in the one way that mattered most to me. A father who says when his child tells him what they love, "Tell me more about that, just that. Tell me more," because those 3 words, offered early and often and sincerely, are the foundation on which a person builds a life that is genuinely their own. And that is the only inheritance worth leaving. Subscribe to the Revenge Diaries if you are not already here. Share this video with someone who is building something in silence, someone who is carrying doubt that was handed to them by someone else, and who needs to see that the doubt can be outlasted. Comment below. Tell me what you would have done. Tell me where you are in your own version of this story. I read all of it, and I will be in the comments this week. And if this story gave you something, a shift in how you see something, a reminder that the long road is worth taking, please like this video and share it, because that is how this community grows. And this community, in my experience, is exactly where stories like this belong. I will see you in the next one.